If you can see us, you are truly in danger. But if you cannot see us, and the only thing you can hear is our laughter, then what you are about to face is beyond compare."
This ominous introduction perfectly encapsulates the terror and bewildering speed of the 5th Legion, the White Scars. For those Warhammer 40K enthusiasts who revel in the lore of the Space Marine chapters, and especially for those who have a penchant for historical parallels with the great Mongol hordes of Earth's past, the White Scars offer a uniquely thrilling narrative. If you've ever marveled at the near conquest of the world by warriors on horseback, then prepare to meet their galactic, power-armored successors. This is an exploration of the chapter that famously declared, "The steppes of the East are not enough for us, we shall ride across the galaxy." The genesis of the 5th Legion, the Star Hunters. The White Scars, known in the annals of the Imperium as the 5th Legion, were among the first Space Marine legions founded by the Emperor of Mankind. Their origins are rooted in the tumultuous unification wars on Terra, a period when the Emperor sought to bring all the warring factions of humanity's homeworld under his singular, enlightened rule. Initially, this legion was not known as the White Scars. They bore the name Star Hunters. This moniker reflected their early operational doctrines and the nature of their recruitment. The Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, decreed their formation specifically to fight in these brutal internecine conflicts. The first aspirants and warriors inducted into the fledgling Star Hunters were drawn from the hardy and resilient peoples of the Thule Basin in northern Terra. These were not ordinary men, even before their transformation into Astartes. They were genetically shaped and conditioned to survive in harsh, radiation-contaminated environments, a testament to the desolation that parts of Terra had endured. This inherent resilience translated into a preference for solitary or small unit missions, undertaking tasks that larger, more conventional forces might find untenable. In its nascent days, the Legion was not organized into massive, monolithic armies, a common structure for other legions. Instead, the Star Hunters were structured as a collection of smaller, highly autonomous pioneer units. Each of these groups, often referred to as brotherhoods or clans even in these early stages, could range in size from 500 to 30 Astartes. Crucially, these formations operated with complete independence from one another. While these numbers might seem substantial when compared to the company structures of a modern Space Marine chapter, which typically fields around 100 Astartes per company, it's vital to remember the context of the Legion era, where legions comprised tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of warriors. Thus, these Star Hunter units were indeed comparatively small and decentralized for their time. This inherent freedom and decentralized command structure had a profound impact on the Legion's early development. It allowed each distinct group to cultivate its own unique rituals, traditions, and even specialized methods of warfare. This was further compounded by the fact that their Primarch, Jagatai Khan, had not yet been rediscovered by the Emperor. In his absence, some Star Hunter units found themselves fighting alongside contingents from other legions. These interactions, while fostering interlegionary cooperation to some extent, also led to the adoption of habits and doctrines that were, in some cases, alien to the core identity that would later define them. Over time, these divergences and adopted practices began to sow the seeds of internal friction and the first subtle fractures within the Legion's burgeoning identity, a foreshadowing of greater conflicts to come. The unsung heroes of unification, forging an identity in silence. Despite their significant contributions and numerous battlefield successes during the Unification Wars, the Star Hunters received little in the way of official praise or the widespread recognition they arguably deserved. Critical missions, such as the daring raid on the Albin fortress in Dubris or the grueling 83-day campaign fought in the subterranean catacombs of Caridro against the formidable Ore armies, were largely overlooked by the scribes and historians of the nascent Imperium. Their names and deeds were conspicuously absent from the grand chronicles of the era. However, this perceived silence and lack of acknowledgement did not breed resentment or disillusionment within the ranks of the Star Hunters. Instead, it paradoxically forged a stronger, more insular sense of identity. They began to adopt a fight club mentality, taking a perverse pride in their obscurity. They started referring to themselves as Terra's Forgotten Sons, a title that spoke of their quiet professionalism and their detachment from the clamor for glory that characterized some other imperial formations. In this period, the Star Hunters' role was multifaceted. They were not merely reconnaissance units, scouting ahead of the main imperial thrusts, nor were they solely vanguard elements meant to absorb the initial shock of enemy contact. Their duties often involved deep infiltration into enemy territory, identifying critical vulnerabilities, and systematically dismantling the enemy's capacity to wage war from within. Typically, they would deploy far in advance of the Emperor's main armies, penetrating deep into hostile lands to conduct preparatory operations and execute debilitating attrition attacks, effectively clearing the path for the larger formations that followed. A defining characteristic of the Star Hunters, which set them apart from many other legions, was their unwavering adherence to orders issued directly by the Emperor himself. They were less inclined to take commands from other imperial authorities, even those of high rank, unless explicitly sanctioned by the master of mankind. This trait further solidified their independence and their reputation as a self-reliant and at times enigmatic military force. The Great Crusade, a galaxy to explore, a Primarch to find. As the unification wars drew to a close and the Emperor launched the Great Crusade, his ambitious campaign to reunite all of humanity's lost colonies scattered across the galaxy, the Star Hunters were among the very first legions to be dispatched from Terra. True to their established operational doctrine of reconnaissance and independent action, the Legion was once again divided into hundreds of small, self-sufficient expeditionary fleets and units. Their mission was to spread out across the vast, uncharted expanses of the galaxy, to explore, to make contact, and to bring worlds into imperial compliance. It was during this far-flung period of exploration that one of these dispersed Star Hunter groups made a discovery of profound significance: the planet Chthoniya. For those unfamiliar, Chthoniya was the harsh, subterranean, gang-ruled world where the Primarch Horus was raised. It would later become the primary recruitment world and adopted homeworld for his legion, the Lunar Wolves, later the Sons of Horus. This chance discovery by the Star Hunters laid the groundwork for a long-standing, if complex, relationship between the Vth Legion and Horus in the years that followed. As the Great Crusade progressed, the Legion continued to hone its unique style of warfare, mastering the art of hit-and-run tactics. They adopted a combat philosophy centered on delivering lightning-fast, unexpected assaults on their enemies, and then withdrawing with equal speed before the foe could mount an effective counter-offensive. This strategic evolution marked a significant shift in their role. They were no longer solely reconnaissance or pioneer units. They were transforming into a high-tempo, deadly offensive force capable of delivering devastating blows. However, the relentless pace of the Crusade, the unceasing wars against myriad Xenos empires and recalcitrant human civilizations, and the constant attrition of warriors began to take a heavy toll on the Legion's morale. The endless campaigns and the mounting losses chipped away at their spirit, and with each passing day, the hope for respite or ultimate victory seemed to dwindle. It was during this challenging and arduous period that a motto emerged from within their ranks, a phrase that encapsulated their stubborn determination and warrior spirit. Each new day is a victory. This simple yet profound statement was a reflection of their unyielding resolve, their choice to fight to the last breath rather than seek aid or succumb to despair. The coming of the Khan, a new dawn on Chogoris. Just as it seemed that the Legion's endurance was reaching its breaking point, with hope beginning to fade, the Emperor finally located their long-lost Primarch, Jagatai Khan. The Khan was discovered on the feral world of Chogoris, a planet of vast plains, towering mountains, and a populace living a nomadic tribal existence. Jagatai had risen to become the paramount leader of the dominant tribal confederation on his world. When the emperor arrived at the Quanzhou Palace in the mountainous Kumkata region and came face to face with Jagatai, the Primarch was deeply impressed by his father's vision and ideals for humanity. He readily swore an oath of fealty and service to the emperor. Though one might speculate whether Jagatai, with his fierce independence, would have so easily joined had he not been genuinely moved by the emperor's cause. Jagatai Khan, unlike many of his Primarch brothers who had been raised on more technologically advanced or politically complex worlds, was not as experienced in the sophisticated technologies and intricate tactical doctrines prevalent throughout the expanding Imperium. His upbringing on the steppes of Chogoris had imbued him with a more instinctual and intuitive approach to leadership and warfare, shaped by the nomadic lifestyle and tribal conflicts of his youth. This cultural heritage bore strong resemblances to the ancient Turkic and Mongol peoples of Terra's history, a connection that perhaps explains the deep affection many Warhammer enthusiasts hold for this particular chapter. Consequently, the initial task of unifying the disparate, scattered Star Hunter units and bringing them under his singular command proved to be a considerable challenge for Jagatai. The Legion had developed deeply ingrained independent traditions, and melding them into a cohesive whole required both time and a unique approach. However, Jagatai was a charismatic and forceful leader. He gradually reshaped the Star Hunters, imbuing them with the foundational elements of his own Chogorian culture. This transformation culminated in a grand ceremony held on Chogoris, known as the Blooding Khan Ayini. During this pivotal event, the disparate Legion units were formally brought together. An estimated 50 Astartes of the Legion adopted new Chogorian names and ritually inscribed battle scars upon their faces, signifying their rebirth as a unified entity, a single soul ready to declare its presence to the galaxy. From this point forward, the Legion would increasingly be known by its new name, the White Scars, a direct reference to these ritual markings. The new traditions introduced by Jaghatai Khan were not limited to warfare. He fostered a multifaceted culture within the Legion that embraced the arts. White Scars warriors were trained not only in the use of weapons but also in calligraphy, poetry, and the rich oral tradition of storytelling. This cultural richness, with its emphasis on individual expression and ancient customs, inevitably began to clash with the more rigid, utilitarian, and often dogmatically rational doctrines of the wider Imperium. This, in turn, led to occasional tensions and ideological disagreements with some of the other Primarchs and their legions, who perhaps viewed the White Scars' ways as unconventional or even undisciplined. Masters of the Lightning Strike, the White Scars unleashed. Throughout the remainder of the Great Crusade, the White Scars Legion, now fully under Jagatai Khan's command, brought the swift cavalry tactics inherited from Chogoris to the battlefields of the galaxy with devastating effect. They assailed their enemies like a thunderbolt, their sheer speed making them appear as fleeting and unstoppable as the wind. These tactics proved so effective that their fame spread throughout the galaxy, particularly after significant victories against formidable foes such as the Orcs of the Sengamar sector and the various Xenos races of the Warist cluster. These victories, of course, were not won without cost. For example, in the Kolan campaign alone, the Legion suffered approximately 10% casualties from their 80 zero-strong force deployed there. However, Jagatai Khan always led from the front, fighting in the very heart of the battle. This fearless leadership inspired profound respect and unwavering loyalty among his warriors. It was during the prolonged and brutal engagements on the planet Hoth that the Legion finally and formally adopted its ultimate identity. The name Star Hunters was officially retired, and White Scars was embraced by all. This name was not only inspired by the culture of Chogoris, but also served as a direct reference to the white ritual scars that the warriors proudly bore on their faces. Their name and their distinctive appearance became intrinsically linked, symbols of their unique heritage and martial philosophy. The shadow of betrayal, the Horus Heresy looms. Just before the galaxy-spanning cataclysm of the Horus Heresy erupted, the White Scars Legion was deeply embroiled in a protracted and arduous war against Orc forces in the Chondak system. Unbeknownst to Jagatai Khan and his warriors at the time, this conflict was being deliberately prolonged and manipulated by the covert actions of the Alpha Legion, one of the legions that would later declare for the traitor Warmaster Horus. It seemed a shadowy game was afoot, designed to keep the formidable White Scars bogged down and isolated, far from the critical events that were about to unfold. Jagatai, ever the strategist, was prosecuting this war with a patient, calculated approach rather than succumbing to reckless aggression, unaware of the larger deception at play. And then, as this distant war ground on, the galaxy began to witness one of the greatest and most devastating betrayals in its long and bloody history. Horus Lupercal, first Primarch and Warmaster of the Imperium, succumbed to the insidious temptations of chaos and openly rebelled against his father, the Emperor. As the first chilling signs of this monumental treachery began to surface, Rogel Dawn, the stoic Primarch of the Imperial Fists and Praetorian of Terra, sent an urgent astropathic message calling the White Scars to return to Terra with all haste. Simultaneously, Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves, also managed to contact Jagatai, proposing that their legions unite and fight together against the rapidly emerging traitor forces. However, Horus, a Primarch of incredible intellect and unparalleled tactical genius, had already anticipated these possibilities. He had tasked his own Alpha Legion with launching a preemptive assault against Leman Russ's Space Wolves. This cunning maneuver was designed to ensnare both the Space Wolves and, by extension, the White Scars, delaying their ability to intervene in the opening stages of the heresy. In the ensuing Yarant system conflict, often referred to as the Battle of Trisolian or the Trisolian Campaign, though Yarant was a key part of it, Russ's forces suffered heavy losses. Jagatai Khan, though deeply unwilling to abandon his friend Leman Russ in his hour of need, ultimately prioritized the urgent summons from Terra, the heart of the Imperium. Preparations began immediately for the perilous journey back to the throne world, a voyage that would have to navigate the treacherous currents of the warp, now roiling with the psychic energies unleashed by the heresy and beset by warp storms. But the Alpha Legion, ever diligent in their duplicity, were not idle. The White Scars fleet had to fight its way through a determined blockade established by the Alpha Legion, and only after a fierce and costly struggle did they manage to break out of the Chondak system. This initial major clash served to highlight Jagatai Khan's unwavering loyalty to the Emperor, even in the face of overwhelming uncertainty and grave danger. The perilous journey home, trials of spirit and steel. One of the most striking and pivotal stops during Jagatai Khan's desperate voyage back to Terra was the ruined and desolate world of Prospero. This had once been the vibrant homeworld of the Thousand Suns Legion, but it had been laid to waste by the Space Wolves years prior at the outset of the heresy. Following the Council of Nicaea and Magnus's subsequent unsanctioned actions, here, on this planet of ghosts and sorrow, Jagatai Khan confronted a psychic echo or shard of Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns, who had been defeated by Leman Russ. In this spectral encounter, the two Primarch brothers debated their past triumphs and failures, their differing philosophies, and the nature of the Emperor's Imperium. As might be expected, the shade of Magnus attempted to sway Jagatai, urging him to join Horus and the forces of chaos, arguing that the Emperor could not be trusted. When the White Scars first set foot upon this blighted world, they were confronted not by physical enemies, but by the ethereal remnants of thousands of slain souls, the psychic detritus of a shattered legion. Their warriors endured a profound spiritual assault, a battle for their very souls where conventional weapons proved useless. Despite Magnus's persuasive arguments about the Emperor's alleged failings and the allure of Horus's rebellion, Jagatai Khan remained resolute. With a decisive, unhesitating strike of his blade, he shattered the psychic projection of his fallen brother. No sooner had this spectral confrontation ended than another traitor Primarch and his legion appeared. Mortarion, master of the Death Guard, he too came with the same offer: join Horus or be destroyed. This time, however, refusal would not be met with philosophical debate, but with open, brutal warfare. Battle was now unavoidable. Yet, even as the White Scars faced these external threats from their former brothers in arms, a far more insidious danger was festering within their own ranks: an internal rebellion. It was perhaps naive to expect every single Astartes within the Legion to share Jagatai Khan's absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the Emperor. The seeds of this internal dissent were sown by officers such as Torgun Khan and Hasik Khan. Both were Terran-born Astartes, veterans of the Unification Wars, who had begun to question Jagatai's leadership and his seemingly unwavering, perhaps even blind, devotion to a distant emperor. This faction, harboring dark thoughts of siding with Horus and the apparent liberation he offered, found themselves opposed by a majority of warriors, predominantly those of Chogorian origin, who remained fiercely loyal to their Primarch and his ideals. This internal conflict brought to the surface a long-simmering, unspoken division within the Legion, a deep cultural chasm between the Terran-born veterans and the newer Chogorian recruits. This divide stemmed from their vastly different origins, life philosophies, training methods, worldviews, and value systems. The Terran-born Astartes were largely products of the Emperor's direct influence during the Unification Wars, raised and trained in the more centralized, densely populated regions of Terra. They were indoctrinated with the Imperium's ideals of strict discipline, hierarchical command structures, and the concept of universal unity. While this system forged powerful and effective soldiers, it often left little room for individual initiative or the preservation of distinct local cultures. In stark contrast, the Chogorian warriors were raised on Jaghatai Khan's homeworld, steeped in the freedom-loving nomadic traditions of the steppes, akin to the ancient Turkic and Mongol cultures of Old Earth. They came from a tribal society with its own unique language, such as Korchin, an abstract and poetic tongue, customs, and even distinct styles of warfare. These cultural elements, particularly the nuanced language, often created a barrier for the Terran-born, who found them difficult to understand or appreciate. This difference manifested not just in language but in behavior and overall understanding. The Chogorians lived in harmony with nature, while the Terran-born, hailing from a more industrialized past, often prioritized technology, order, and the dominion over nature. Furthermore, Chogorian culture placed immense value on individual honor, tribal loyalty, and spiritual integrity. This often made them appear undisciplined or enigmatic in the eyes of the Terran Astartes, who were accustomed to a more rigid, rules-based military system. This mutual lack of understanding occasionally bred suspicion and even animosity, leading to friction not just between individuals, but also within the Legion's command structure. So, why did these Terran-born Astartes, veterans of the Emperor's own wars, contemplate the ultimate heresy of siding with chaos? The primary reason lay in the profound sense of alienation, lack of belonging, and perceived marginalization they felt within the Legion. Over time, under Jagatai Khan's leadership, Chogorian culture had thoroughly permeated and reshaped the Legion's spirit and structure. The White Scars had increasingly become an extension of Chogoris' traditions. In this transformative process, the Terran-born warriors felt progressively sidelined, culturally isolated, and as if their original identities and contributions were being erased or devalued. The simmering resentment and discomfort finally boiled over during the crucible of the Horus Heresy. For these disaffected Astartes, Horus's call to rebellion seemed less like a betrayal and more like an offer of liberation. His promises represented an escape from a structure in which they felt like outsiders, a chance to regain importance, authority, and perhaps, for the first time in a long while, to have their voices heard. Horus's defiance of the Emperor provided an outlet and a direction for their accumulated frustration and disillusionment. To them, it was not an act of treason, but a potential rebirth. Ultimately, however, loyalty to Jaghatai Khan and the Emperor prevailed. Shiban Khan, a loyalist Chogorian officer, led a courageous and decisive boarding action against the vessel carrying the primary rebel contingent. The White Scars confronted and decisively crushed the treachery within their own ranks. For the traitors who survived this bloody internal conflict, only one fate awaited. They were to be assigned to the Sagyar Mazan, special suicide squads. Joining these units was the only path to cleanse their stained honor, a redemption that could only be achieved through a worthy death in battle. For 4 long and arduous years, the White Scars fought their way across the war-torn galaxy, battling not only the chaotic warp storms that made interstellar travel a nightmare, but also the fleets and armies of the traitor legions who sought to intercept them. During this grueling odyssey, Jagatai Khan reverted to the Legion's tried and tested methods of warfare: hit and run attacks, attrition strategies, and sudden, overwhelming assaults to break through enemy lines. However, when such tactics become an identifiable signature, it is inevitable that astute opponents will learn to anticipate and counter them. Consequently, these methods did not always yield the desired results. The traitor legions began to adapt to the White Scars' strategies, and Jagatai's forces found themselves increasingly cornered and beleaguered. The situation reached a crisis point during the fierce fighting at the Kalium Gate. The death of Chin Zar, one of Jagatai's most trusted Keshig commanders, and the heavy losses sustained by the Legion forced the Khan to make a radical decision. Continuous retreat and evasion were no longer viable solutions. A decisive breakthrough was needed. A glimmer of hope lay in an ancient and mysterious Xenos artifact known as the Dark Glass. This enigmatic device possessed the power to open a temporary passage into the Eldar Webway, a labyrinthine dimension existing outside of normal space and largely immune to the chaos of the warp. However, activating this gateway would demand a terrible price. One of the Legion's spiritual leaders, the Stormseer Targatai Yesuge, without a moment's hesitation, sacrificed his own life to power the device. This courageous act of self-immolation activated the ancient Dark Glass, allowing the White Scars to bypass the chaotic darkness of the warp and finally reach Terra. The Siege of Terra, the Khan unfettered. Upon their arrival at Terra, the White Scars found the throne world in a dire state, the Emperor's palace itself under massive siege by the combined might of the traitor legions. There was no time for rest or regrouping. The Legion was immediately committed to the desperate defense, ready to fight shoulder to shoulder with the loyalist Blood Angels and Imperial Fists. While the intricacies of the Siege of Terra are vast and complex, the primary task assigned to Jagatai Khan and his warriors was the critical mission of recapturing the Lion's Gate spaceport. This strategic asset was vital for the landing of further reinforcements. Jaghatai Khan wasted no time. He swiftly assembled a formidable armored force, comprising 100 tank regiments and the Legion's potent Skyhunter jetbike squadrons, forming the 1st Terra Armored Division. This powerful combined arms formation launched a thunderous assault through the Colossi Gate. The attack was spearheaded by jetbike-mounted warriors descending from the skies, supported by the overwhelming firepower of the Legion's tanks, punching through the enemy lines like a bolt of lightning. In one of the most critical junctures of the battle for Lion's Gate, Jaghatai Khan came face to face with his traitorous brother, Mortarion, the Daemon Primarch of the Death Guard. The ensuing duel between these two demigods of war was a cataclysmic confrontation that had a significant impact on the fate of the siege. Jagatai Khan, with his incredible speed and martial prowess, managed to defeat the Lord of Plagues, banishing him temporarily into the warp. However, this monumental victory came at a heavy cost. The Khan himself was grievously wounded in the titanic struggle. By successfully recapturing the Lion's Gate spaceport, the White Scars achieved more than just a tactical victory. They secured a vital beachhead, an essential entry point for the powerful loyalist reinforcements that were en route to Terra, including the Ultramarines, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves. This strategic masterstroke effectively nullified one of the traitor Horus's greatest advantages, his numerical superiority on the ground around the palace. Terra's defenders were no longer alone. Aftermath and rebirth, the Codex and Chogorian ways. When the Horus Heresy finally ended with the Emperor's Pyrrhic victory, the White Scars, like all other surviving loyalist legions, underwent a significant restructuring. They were subdivided into smaller, more manageable formations known as chapters, in accordance with the dictates of the new Codex Astartes, the tome of military organization penned by the Primarch Robert Guillemot. However, despite this new organizational framework, the White Scars steadfastly refused to compromise their core combat philosophies and cultural identity. The cherished values of speed, freedom of action, and individual initiative remained the foundational pillars of their warrior spirit. In the chaotic aftermath of the heresy, the newly formed White Scars chapter was assigned responsibility for the control and security of the volatile Maelstrom Zone, a vast and turbulent region of space. Their homeworld of Chogoris, with its endless steppes, became their new chapter monastery and central bastion. While they generally adhered to the tenets of the Codex Astartes, the White Scars, much like many other chapters with strong pre-existing traditions, interpreted its guidelines through the lens of their own unique culture rather than applying them with rigid, literal precision. Their organizational structure continued to be heavily influenced by the nomadic and tribal traditions of Chogoris. This imbued them with a greater degree of flexibility and a stronger emphasis on individual initiative compared to many other, more dogmatic chapters. The hierarchy of the White Scars chapter reflects this blend of codex structure and Chogorian tradition. At the apex of the chapter is the Great Khan, the chapter master. Subordinate to him are the Khans, equivalent to company captains, each commanding a brotherhood, which are the White Scars' equivalent of a codex company. Although the codex defines each brotherhood as a company or detachment, within the White Scars, these units operate with a significant degree of autonomy. Each brotherhood possesses its own distinct spirit, its own rhythm, and often its own favored tactics. Beyond the standard warrior ranks, the White Scars maintain several specialized roles with unique responsibilities. The Stormseers are the chapter's equivalent of librarians. However, they are more than just psykers who wield the power of the warp. They are also regarded as shamans, visionaries, and spiritual leaders who guide the chapter through rituals and interpret omens. Apothecaries are known by the Chogorian term Arch-Koblins, white boys, sons, and their sacred duty of safeguarding the chapter's gene seed is held in the highest esteem. As it is in most chapters, Tech Marines bear the title of Ulkun, while fleet captains are known as Tenrik Khan. The Kavkans serve in an advisory capacity, providing their wisdom and counsel to the chapter's leadership. During the eras of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, when they were a full legion, the White Scars possessed a far more numerous and complex structure. They utilized a system of hordes, which were essentially super commands, each comprising thousands of warriors. These hordes were, in turn, composed of smaller, more specialized brotherhoods, each with its own unique combat style. Some brotherhoods specialized in lightning-fast assaults, others in deep reconnaissance, and some focused on assassinating enemy commanders. These brotherhoods were shaped by their preferred military tactics. For instance, the Brotherhood of the Storm, famously led by Sheban Khan during the Heresy, specialized in speed and reconnaissance. The Brotherhood of the Summer Lightning consisted of rapid assault teams adept at catching the enemy unprepared. The Brotherhood of the Blooded Spear was more inclined towards direct, heavy engagements. The Brotherhood of the Moon, once led by the ill-fated Torgun Khan, undertook more insular but deadly covert operations. Beneath these brotherhoods existed even more specialized subunits. The Talons, or Talon Claws, comprised the most experienced scout warriors, while the Karash were volunteer suicide squads, warriors who eagerly lined up for the most perilous missions. The distinction between Ak-Koblins, often associated with healing and preservation, and Kara-Koblins, black boys, sons, potentially those using more destructive methods or associated with units like destroyers who might cause more collateral damage, also hinted at cultural nuances or even divisions regarding acceptable levels of destruction in warfare, with the Kara units being used more rarely and with greater caution due to the excessive harm they might inflict on the environment or non-combatants. Aversion to stillness, the White Scars and Dreadnoughts. The White Scars hold a distinctly different perspective on Dreadnoughts compared to most other Space Marine chapters. While, in many chapters, interment within a Dreadnought sarcophagus is considered a great honor, a way for a grievously wounded hero to continue serving the Emperor, for the White Scars, it is viewed almost as a curse. For these warriors, who hold freedom of movement and the agility of the living body as sacred, being eternally encased within a walking machine signifies the chaining of the soul, a spiritual imprisonment. Consequently, they generally avoid the use of dreadnoughts whenever possible, though they do not entirely reject them. The few dreadnoughts that are deployed by the chapter are known as Uhan Solban, roughly Guardians of the Lonely Grave or similar. These Astartes relinquish their former names, undergo a ritual ceremony to adopt a new identity, and are considered spiritually reborn. However, as mentioned, this rebirth is not seen as a desirable fate in their eyes. The philosophy of the hunt, warfare as a swift storm. All White Scars combat strategies are fundamentally based on the principle of speed. As previously discussed, their hallmark tactics include hit-and-run attacks, agile assaults, and rapid withdrawals. This style of warfare is particularly devastating against heavier, more cumbersome armies that struggle to react to their lightning maneuvers. The extensive use of jet bikes and land speeders allows their units to penetrate enemy lines almost unseen and disengage just as quickly. However, such high-speed operations cannot tolerate indiscipline. Every White Scar warrior is trained to a level where they can successfully complete their mission even if separated from their unit. They possess a remarkable degree of self-sufficiency, capable of performing maintenance on their own vehicles and even administering medical aid to themselves or their brothers when necessary. The White Scars fleet is as specialized as their ground forces, designed with an emphasis on speed. The chapter's Tech Marines, the Khan, specially modify their vessels to be highly maneuverable and agile. This speed, however, comes at a cost. Their ships typically have thinner armor, lighter weaponry, and a somewhat reduced carrying capacity compared to the vessels of other chapters. The primary objective is to strike the enemy like lightning and, if required, withdraw rapidly. The title of the most agile space fleet in the galaxy is earned through such sacrifices in other areas. Following the heresy and the adoption of the Codex Astartes, the White Scars were nominally divided into 10 brotherhoods. But, as is their way, these units do not function like standard codex companies. Each brotherhood maintains a specialized area of expertise. Examples include the Spear Point Brotherhood, comprised of experienced veterans, the Firefist Brotherhood, focusing on assault speed, the Eagle Brotherhood, masters of hunting enemy commanders, the Tool War Brotherhood, close combat specialists, the Stormwrath Brotherhood, psychers integrated into combat roles, the Planestalker Brotherhood, aerial warfare experts, the Hawk's Eye Brotherhood, focused on armored transport and infantry, the Blood Rider Brotherhood, excelling in rapid strikes with Inceptor units, the Stormheart Brotherhood, heavy weapons specialists, and the Wind Speaker Brotherhood, reconnaissance-based. Each of these brotherhoods represents a different facet of the White Scar's multifaceted art of war. Beyond the barbarian veil, culture, beliefs, and rituals. For a long period, the White Scars were often unfairly branded as barbarians in the eyes of the wider Imperium. This, however, is a superficial and largely inaccurate perception. The White Scars are not merely skilled warriors, They are a culturally rich community that values learning, art, and intricate rituals. As mentioned, their training extends far beyond the mere use of weapons. Calligraphy, the oral recitation of epic sagas, and hunting techniques that emphasize harmony with nature are all traditions that nourish the soul of the White Scars. These non-combat practices are not seen as weaknesses, but as indicators of spiritual strength and force of will. For a White Scar, war is not solely about defeating the enemy. It is also a means of self-discovery and honoring their past. Their native Chogorian language holds a significant place in both daily conversation and ritualistic observances. This poetic and rhythmic tongue is even used on the battlefield as a tool of defiance and a means of unnerving their foes. War poetry, or ceremonial speeches and cantos delivered before or during battle, serves to elevate the warriors' morale and purify their spirits. These cantos draw inspiration from the ancient myths, legends, and heroic tales of Chogoris. Crucially, the White Scars do not subscribe to the belief, common in many parts of the Imperium, that the Emperor is a god. Their logic on this matter is refreshingly pragmatic. For them, the Emperor is a supremely great leader, a unifying figure of immense historical importance, but not a divine being to be worshipped. Spiritual guidance within the chapter is primarily the domain of the Storm Seers. These psychic warriors are not just librarian officers with access to warp powers. They are revered as shamans who can divine the future, interpret dreams, and preside over sacred rituals. It is believed that Storm Seers can communicate with the heavens and the winds, leading to their association with lightning, wind, and other natural forces. Their attire and symbols naturally reflect these nature-based beliefs. When a warrior joins the White Scars, he symbolically relinquishes his ties to his former tribe on Chogoris. His loyalty is now directed solely towards the chapter and the Great Khan. Nevertheless, former names, tribal traditions, and personal marks of identity are often preserved and acknowledged within rituals, maintaining a balance between individuality and collective allegiance. Loyalty, unsurprisingly for Astartes, is sacred to the White Scars. Their devotion to the Emperor is unquestionable, and the legacy of Jaghatai Khan serves as a spiritual guide. Betrayal within the chapter is viewed not just as a physical crime, but as a spiritual abomination, a profound stain upon one's honor. The Magyar Mazan discipline, established in the wake of internal rebellions, particularly during the Heresy, starkly illustrates the severity of this loyalty code. Traitorous warriors assigned to these units believe they can only be cleansed of their sins through an honorable, sacrificial death in battle, a concept somewhat similar to the repentia of the Adepta Sororitas. For the White Scars, war is not merely a duty, it is an extension of nature itself. They see themselves not as conventional soldiers, but as hunters. Much like a predator silently stalking its prey across the steppes, they observe their enemy, carefully read the environment, the battlefield terrain, and strike at the moment of greatest weakness. The concept of war as a hunt forms the basis of all their tactical decision-making processes. For this reason, new recruits, before participating in actual combat, take part in great ritual hunts on the plains of Chogoris. These hunts are, in essence, trials designed to test their patience, agility, and physical endurance. Death for a White Scar is never viewed as a tragedy. According to their beliefs, death is a natural and inevitable part of a journey. This mindset allows them to act fearlessly and freely on the battlefield. Some warriors, after death, have their names or deeds carved onto the Bagatur Bishi, the chapter's sacred monument or totem. The names of those interred in Dreadnoughts are especially immortalized here as a spiritual representation of their second life. Though even this honor cannot truly compensate for the perceived sacrifice of their freedom from a White Scar's perspective. The ritual of taking a new name before an anticipated death is also an important rite within White Scar's culture, symbolizing a spiritual rebirth or a transition. Death, in this context, is not an end, but signifies war taking another form. standing alone, riding with a few, relations with the wider Imperium. The White Scars generally maintain a distant but respectful relationship with other chapters within the Imperium. They may experience some ideological friction, particularly with chapters that adhere to overly rigid hierarchies and strict codex interpretations, such as the Ultramarines. The fundamental reason for this, as touched upon earlier, is the inherent individualism and desire for autonomy that lies at the core of the White Scars' nature. They consider the ability to act independently of central authorities a virtue. Though they might be perceived by outsiders as strange, tribalistic, or even undisciplined, these perceptions rapidly evaporate once the White Scars commit to a battlefield. Witnessing their organized, deadly, and highly disciplined execution of lightning warfare usually inspires nothing but respect from those who fight alongside or against them. The blood of the Khan, gene seed stability. The process that transforms ordinary humans into superhuman space marines in the Warhammer 40K universe is centered around the implantation of genetically engineered organs known as the gene seed. Each chapter safeguards and cultivates its own gene seed, which is derived from the DNA of its Primarch. For the White Scars, this genetic heritage comes directly from Jaghatai Khan. His genetic makeup imparts not only physical characteristics, but also influences the spiritual and psychological disposition of the Legion and its successor chapters. The gene seed of the White Scars is noted for being generally very stable. Unlike some chapters such as the Night Lords or the Thousand Sons, pre-heresy for the latter, in terms of overt mutation risk, whose gene seed may carry a higher risk of mutation or degradation, the White Scars' genetic material has remained remarkably pure and uncorrupted throughout the millennia. This stability makes them a reliable asset in the eyes of the Imperium, and also renders their gene seed an ideal source for the founding of new chapters. The reasons behind this success include meticulously conducted ritualistic inspections, the sacred importance that the Koblins, apothecaries, attach to the task of gene seed collection and preservation, and the heavily guarded gene vaults, which in some chapters are protected by Dreadnoughts, though the White Scars' preference might differ. Forging a hunter, recruitment and training. The White Scars traditionally recruit their new aspirants from the nomadic tribes inhabiting the vast steppes of their homeworld, Chogoris. These communities are renowned for their fierce warrior cultures, and their children are trained from a very young age in the essential skills of survival, hunting, and close-quarters combat. The selection and training process is, as expected, extraordinarily arduous. Chapter overseers scout potential candidates from among the tribes, and these youths are then subjected to a series of grueling, often deadly tests. Physical endurance, resistance to pain, and mental discipline are rigorously assessed. Those few who survive these trials are accepted into the chapter and begin the process of gene seed implantation. From this point forward, the aspirant is no longer just a tribal warrior. They become a bearer of the White Scars' spirit. The training regimen encompasses not only the arts of war but also the chapter's rituals, language, and deeply ingrained culture. All traditions, from calligraphy and the recitation of epic sagas to the principles of harmony with nature and unwavering loyalty, are instilled into the young warrior's soul. The Scars in the Time of Ending, the 40th millennium. As the Warhammer 40K timeline advances into the 40th millennium, the galaxy is, unsurprisingly, engulfed in unprecedented chaos. The Cicatrix Maledictum, a colossal warp rift, has torn the Imperium in two, ushering in a new dark age of terror and uncertainty. In this dire period of crisis, the Primarch Roboute Guilliman has returned to lead the Imperium and has launched the Indomitus Crusade to reclaim lost worlds and push back the encroaching darkness. As part of this massive undertaking, all Loyalist chapters have been supplied with genetically enhanced new super soldiers, the Primaris Space Marines. The White Scars initially approached this significant change with caution. However, recognizing the necessity of ensuring the chapter's continued viability and enhancing their effectiveness against escalating galactic threats, they, albeit somewhat reluctantly, accepted Primaris warriors into their ranks. The new Primaris Outrider Akai and Inceptor jump pack units, in particular, proved to be an excellent fit for the White Scar's doctrine of high speed and mobility. Primaris Astartes, possessing Stormseer abilities, have also significantly augmented the chapter's psychic might. In the current era, the White Scars are heavily deployed in and around the Maelstrom Zone, Segmentum Ultima, and the volatile Nukmund Rift. These regions are in a state of perpetual warfare due to the instability of warp passages, frequent Orc and Chaos incursions, and various Xenos threats. One might call this the Warhammer can't stay out of war syndrome. The White Scars continue to hold the distinction of being one of the first responder chapters to threats emerging. In these chaotic zones, thanks to their extensive use of jet bikes, land speeders, and fast-moving armored formations, they can traverse vast interstellar distances and redeploy between systems with incredible speed. This capability makes them, in effect, the Imperium's mobile hammer, a swift and decisive strike force. The current leader of the White Scars chapter is Jaghatai Khan, often noted as a successor or a prominent Khan, though specific lore can shift. The subtitles mention Cub Balkan, which is likely Jaghatai Khan or a similar figure, a warrior who has forged countless legends on the battlefield. He is a veteran of numerous critical engagements, from the Cadian Gate's fall to protracted conflicts against the Red Corsairs, Chaos Space Marines, always fighting at the forefront. However, the brutal tortures he has endured and the profound traumas he has experienced during his long service have reportedly made him a more introverted and perhaps even harsher leader in recent times. Rumors circulate within the chapter that some figures from the newer generation are being groomed as potential successors to his command. Notably, names such as Vth Khan and the legendary Master of the Hunt, Khosrow Khan, a well-established figure in White Scar's lore, are often mentioned as future leaders. The unanswered question, what became of Jagatai Khan? A lingering question undoubtedly gnaws at the minds of many. What happened to the Primarch, Jagatai Khan? This is where the narrative enters the realm of enduring mystery. The exact date or manner of Jagatai Khan's demise are indeed, if he is truly dead, remains one of the great enigmas in the Warhammer 40K universe. Official Imperial records tend to state that he disappeared rather than confirming his death. According to these accounts, the Khan vanished during a campaign against the Drukhari, Dark Eldar, one of the most vicious and sadistic Xenos races in the galaxy. This conflict reportedly led him and a select retinue deep into the shadowy depths of Commorragh, the dark city of the Drukhari, located within the Webway. Accounts suggest he was pursuing a Drukhari Archon, or perhaps an even more powerful figure, when he entered the Dark City and was never seen again. Following this event, the White Scars Legion, and later its successor chapters, have clung to the belief that their Primarch is not truly dead, and that he will one day return. Some Stormseers within the chapter believe his spirit is still fighting, perhaps even a captive within Commorragh itself, or that he continues his endless hunt within the treacherous confines of the Webway or even the Warp. For this reason, Jaghatai Khan is venerated within the White Scars, not as a martyr, but as a heroic figure who will eventually return to lead them once more. In essence, his ultimate fate remains unknown, a subject of much speculation and fan theory, officially classified as missing in action. The legacy endures, swift, free, and loyal. Even in the grim darkness of the 42nd millennium, the White Scars continue to demonstrate their mastery in blending advanced technology with ancient traditions. Their Stormseers diligently preserve age-old rituals, while even the new Primaris Space Marines are trained and indoctrinated in accordance with these ancestral teachings. Although they supported Roboute Guilliman's return and the new era he represents, the White Scars still prefer to operate with a significant degree of autonomy in their dealings with the central authorities of the Imperium. They adhere to the Codex Astartes, but they interpret its tenets through the filter of their own values and traditions, rather than applying it literally. They are more inclined to make their own decisions based on the immediate tactical situation, rather than waiting for approval from Mars or Terra, often acting with the independent spirit of a rogue trader. This independent streak naturally leads to occasional friction with more traditionalist chapters. However, as long as the White Scars continue to successfully fulfill their duties and achieve their objectives, their unique operational autonomy is generally tolerated by the wider Imperium. The White Scars have never been a chapter that seeks the galactic spotlight or boasts of its achievements with grand monuments and ostentatious displays. Unlike chapters such as the Ultramarines or the Blood Angels, whose deeds are often a cornerstone of Imperial heroic mythology, the White Scars are known as warriors who consciously and quietly get the job done. They have never desired to become propaganda material. Their priority has always been to strike with lightning speed, withdraw quickly, and wear down their enemies until they collapse. In this respect, they have earned the moniker of silent heroes. They have become a force that mobilizes with incredible speed during galactic crises, often providing crucial counsel and support to other chapters, particularly regarding strategies for rapid warfare. They are still regarded as one of the preeminent chapters when it comes to mastering high-speed combat doctrines. As the 40th millennium grinds on, the White Scars remain, still standing, still free, and still incredibly fast. Though it was not without its challenges, they have embraced Primaris technology, adding to their formidable strength. Yet, they have not forgotten the ancient teachings and traditions carried from the windswept steppes of Chogoris. Freedom, loyalty, and speed. These three fundamental principles define not only their doctrines of war, but also the very soul of the chapter. This is the saga of the White Scars, the mad Huns of Warhammer 40K, a chapter as enigmatic as it is devastating, forever riding the storm of war across the uncaring stars.